All right, so Hackathon Transportation 101. There's probably no one listening at this point because we screwed up the Hangout so bad that it doesn't matter. But we will take this video and chop it up and make it into something that hopefully somebody can use down the road. So let's talk about Hackathon Transportation. If you happen to be watching this, which there's probably not anybody doing anymore, but if you are, you can tweet Ask MLH during this, and my lovely assistant John will be answering questions, or will be queuing up questions for us to answer at the end in case anyone needs them answered. So, who am I? I'm Swift. I'm the commissioner of Major League Hacking. I probably know a lot of you. If you're not familiar with Major League Hacking, we run the official College Hackathon League. We work with student hackathon organizers all over the US, UK, and Mexico to help them put on awesome student hackathons. Today, we're going to talk about transportation, specifically how we get hackers to our hackathons. Hackathons have been going up in size over the last couple of years, and when you talk about putting on a multi-hundred or even a multi-thousand person event, the logistics of getting people there can be pretty difficult. Back when events were smaller, it was easy enough just to have people who are in the region take the train or drive in. But these days, if you actually want to fill up an event, oftentimes you'll either need to do widespread travel reimbursements or charter a bus of some kind to get people there. So these are some common kinds of transportation we have for hackers, ordered by desirability. So they could get themselves there or walk. I suppose they could probably ride a horse, and that might be a little bit better than walking. Then there's charter buses, which are bus trips that could range anywhere from a few hours to quite a few hours going to a hackathon. Typically there's multiple stops in a route, and there's about 56 passengers in a bus. Flights or travel reimbursements, that some events do reimbursements of up to $200 for a flight. So in terms of desirability, it's actually also ordered by price. So obviously having hackers get there themselves is the cheapest, and flights are the most expensive. We'll talk about some of these different kinds of transportation, specifically buses and flights, and the economics of those, and how that works. So first question is, how much does a charter bus actually cost? Because that seems to be one of the most common kinds of hackathon transportation. So last semester, Major League Hacking chartered somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 buses going to hackathons in the season. These numbers are actually based on the 31 closest, most similar buses. So I didn't include any outliers in this calculation. The average cost for a charter bus, and keep in mind these are all 56 passenger buses ranging from trips of at the shortest 2 hours to the longest up to 12 hours. So the average cost for a bus was about $3,300. The minimum was about $2,100. That was a trip between Boston and Philadelphia, which is a pretty popular route. The most expensive one was about $5,000. That one was running from the University of Maryland to West Lafayette, Indiana. The median in this case is actually pretty close to the average, which means that it's a pretty safe assumption that that is actually an average cost, a standard deviation of about $700. So the thing you really want to worry about when you're doing hackathon transportation is the ratio of cost per attendee, also called bang for your buck. What it really boils down to is how many people can you get to your hackathon per dollar that you have to spend. So that ratio actually boils down to the cost of the transportation over the number of people who are able to be transported to the hackathon based on that dollar. So if we look at, and you want to obviously minimize that ratio, so the less money you have to spend per attendee to get them there, the better. So let's look at some common cost per attendee ratios. The top one is for standard travel reimbursements, where an event would reimburse up to $200 per flight, and below is the cost for a standard 56 passenger charter bus. So obviously one person who gets transported for one flight, you end up with a $200 cost per attendee. For a bus filled with 56 passengers that cost you the average cost of $3,300, your cost per attendee would be about $58. So obviously you're able to get almost four times as many hackers to your hackathon, or well, far more than that actually in truth, by picking charter buses instead of travel reimbursements. So let's talk a little bit of philosophy. Why would you want to pick charter buses over travel reimbursements or vice versa? Um, and why would you even want to do travel reimbursements at all, right? If you look at the costs and the standard budget of an event, uh, if the event is not paying for a venue, the most expensive cost in a hackathon's budget is usually transportation or travel reimbursements. Um, so doing travel reimbursements means that you have to take money away from the experience of the event and spend it on getting people there. But deciding that you want to have a more diverse event could be, a positive thing as well. Also, having a huge event with lots of people who are bussed in versus a smaller but more highly curated event, is another thing you might want to consider. Also, what it boils down to is for the same amount of money, you could bring in 56 hackers on a bus, or you could bring in 15 really targeted hackers. I don't think there's a right answer for any of these, but they're all things to consider when you're figuring out your strategy for hackathon transportation and travel reimbursements. So that's the end of the philosophy. We have some basic information. Let's actually talk about the process. Now, this process that I'm going to describe to you guys is the process that I used to charter all those buses from last semester. Obviously, there are iterations and things you can do to make this process more streamlined, but generally speaking, this worked pretty well for me. So generally, it's broken out into 3 steps with the preparations at the beginning. So the first thing you want to do is plan. My recommendation is to compile a list of all of the schools within a 6-hour drive of your event and order them by the distance away from the school. So you come up with your list, and you can order them even by size as well. So you can make the assumption that like certain universities that are larger will have more people who would want to attend the event, and therefore you could more easily fill a bus. You could also plan out like multiple schools in a route within 6 hours. So for example, a route that came to MHACs last year might have been starting in Wisconsin and going to northern Michigan and then coming down to Detroit. So you could plan out the universities within 6 hours that are kind of in a line so that you can come up with a transportation route. And once you have your list of universities and your top targets, you want to reach out to student leadership or students you know at those universities to help figure out how much interest there is in a bus. We'll figure this out, or we'll talk more about this later, but you could charter a bus to a school and pay for the whole thing and reimburse everyone's travel. You can do a ton of things, but if nobody actually wants to go, there's no point in buying that stuff, obviously. So having student leadership or somebody on campus to like drum up interest in taking the bus and organize that bus the day of is super important. One of the most effective strategies we've seen is using Facebook events. So what you'll do is you'll have the person, your contact at school, create a Facebook event for the date that the bus leaves and the time that the bus leaves, and do something to the effect of School X takes Hackathon by storm, or think of another catchy title, and then have them invite as many people from the school that they think would be interested as possible, and then have those people invite their friends as well. You could also use Facebook ads. You could also do targeted outreach. There's a number of ways that you could promote the bus, but you want to make sure there's a minimum threshold of people who will actually want to get on the bus. Just because you might not necessarily need to get 56 passengers from each school because there could be multiple stops in a trip, but you really want to shoot to have as full of a bus as possible, as we'll see a little bit later on. Generally speaking, you can account for at least some attrition on a bus. The rule of thumb for hackathons is that about a third of the people who sign up to attend a hackathon will drop off. I would imagine it's probably pretty close to a bus, if not to the same for a bus, if not higher. So if you actually want to have 56 passengers on a bus, you probably need to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 people say they want to take the bus. I've seen a couple of hackathons do buses that are first come, first serve. So they'll get 4 or 5 buses to come from the same school. They'll all pull up at exactly the same time, and they'll load as many kids as they can onto those buses. And if you're not there early, then you're not going to get on the bus. It kind of sucks that people get left out, but more often than not, it's an incentive for people to get there and actually get on the bus rather than skipping it. So the next thing you want to do is create an itinerary. So an itinerary is just a PDF document that you're going to send to the bus companies that details all of the stops on a trip. This is a sample itinerary based off of one that I used to make. The important things you want to have here, you want to have it clearly denoted as a travel itinerary. You should come up with some kind of internal numbering system because often bus companies will refer to it based on a number rather than the actual trip. So they might run multiple routes for, between your school and another school, but the only way they can identify and differentiate those routes is to that number. So even if you have, like, if your itinerary numbers are like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's totally fine. I did mine based on the year, so 2014, and then the number of the bus that I was requesting. So from 1 to 70 something is what it ended up at. Okay, then you want the date. So that's the date that the bus is actually departing, and the maximum number of passengers, ideally 56. Buses tend to come in multiple sizes. On the smaller end, you can get a mini bus that could hold maybe 30 people, all the way up to double-decker buses, which could hold upwards of 100. But the most common one is 56 passengers. The next thing you want to do is you want to have the exact address of the pickup and / drop-off point, a time for arrival, a time for departure, the duration and the distance, and then a contact at that stop. Now, there's a reason for you to have all these things. They need an exact address so that they can calculate the length of the trip. Having your own distance and duration in there is a good sanity check for you to make sure that, like, the amount of total time and mileage is within reason and that they add up. So most bus trips are actually delineated by distance, not by time. So that's how much they bill you at. So this trip, for example, in total was about a 4.5 hour trip and over 257 miles. Even if it was one stop rather than two, and it was the same amount of distance, it would be the same price. Adding stops in a trip does not make it more expensive. So knowing that, if you want to plan out your routes with multiple schools in a line to your school, that's a good way to do it. As a general rule of thumb, you want the bus to arrive a half an hour before it departs, at least. And when you're dropping off, you want to account for at least 15 minutes for the kids to get off the bus at that point. Typically, you have to be a bit more precise with pickups rather than drop-offs, because the truth is, if people get home earlier or later from the hackathon, it's not as crucial as knowing when they need to be there to get picked up. Having a contact phone number and email address is really great to have on the itinerary. You as the person who's organizing these buses does not want the bus driver calling you if they get to a school and the students aren't there ready to be picked up. You want them to call the contact on campus to figure out where everybody is. In my experience, the most common issue I ran into was that the address that the students gave me was not the actual address that the bus could get to. So they would give me the address of a student center, and maybe they would be on the other side of the student center, and the bus would pull up in front, and then they would have to kind of do the phone tag dance to figure out where they were. But generally speaking, you should definitely have a contact and a phone number at each stop on the trip. So once we have all the things in place, the next step is going to be to collect quotes. Believe it or not, busrates.com is actually one of the best places to do this. Busrates is basically a free service for people who want charter buses, but bus companies pay to be listed on the website. I thought I was going to be able to broadcast my screen in general, and then we could kind of, we can try it. So basically, I'll walk us through going on bus rates and actually booking a trip here. So we'll select this one. Cool. So I'm going to go to busrates.com. So you'll see this interface. You can filter by charter bus type, state, province / city area. So this only really works for the US and Canada. Typically, I'll search by zip code. So I'll figure out the zip code of the school, and I will do a 50-mile or 100-mile search around that radius. In major metropolitan areas, you're going to want to tighten the radius. So in New York, I would never do more than 50 miles. But if I was in an area that was more rural or suburban, I might expand the radius. So we'll search for buses within that zip code. It'll pull up our list. The key thing is that we want to sort by review rating. Oh, cool. So we sort by review rating. Then you'll get a list of companies which you can see here. So the key things you want to look for is the number of buses they have available, the total capacity of the bus, the type of the bus, and the year. Obviously, newer buses are more reliable more often than older buses. So let's say we wanted to request a quote from United Coach Lines. We would check this box and say add to itinerary. I believe I already have this one in my itinerary, which is why it's not adding. But if we go a little farther down, say we pick this company, it's already added to our itinerary. Let's do this one. So select a company here, request a quote. You'll see that it's been added to my itinerary. You can request quotes from as many companies as you want. My recommendation is that you only request quotes from companies that are 4 stars and above. We'll talk a little bit more about why that is later on. But it's fairly important to read the reviews and understand why people like or dislike companies. Once you have filled up your itinerary, you have a number of bus companies you can request quotes from. So you scroll back to the top and click this View Itinerary button. You fill out the details of your trip. Typically, I'll say something along the lines of like my hackathon name and then dash the route. So you should come up with a name to represent each route that you're requesting a bus for. So if you were doing a bus between Rutgers going to Maryland, the route would be Rutgers or something along those lines, just so that you can differentiate among them from the emails that you receive from bus rates. I actually created a special email address for bus rates. You should probably do the same because bus companies tend to produce a lot of spam. But we have something like busquotes@moh.io. And I always tell them email is preferable to phone. The truth is I can always get on the phone and call the bus drivers if I need to get an answer immediately. It's really annoying to have like 150 bus companies calling you at the same time. So I recommend email. You want to upload that itinerary that we generated here, and then you're going to, down below, you're going to fill out the details of the trip. So number of passengers. This is a round trip usually. The start date, when it's leaving, where it's heading to. This is the final destination. It doesn't matter if there are stops in between, as I mentioned before. And then you indicate the time that you are leaving. Down in the additional information and notes, I'll talk about some things that you definitely have to say, but I'll usually say something to the effect of, please indicate what is included in this quote. And we'll go over like what some of those things that are included are in a second. So let's pop back over to the slides. So now that we've had to take a quick look at bus rates, the things that you want to make sure that are included in a bus route is the following. And you need to explicitly ask these because once you've requested a ton of quotes, you're going to get a bunch of inbound emails that all like have different numbers on them, but the numbers mean completely different things depending on if any of these are included. So the 5 things are tip, tolls, hotel, fuel, and tax. Generally speaking, tip is the gratuity for the driver. Most bus companies are going to tell you somewhere between 10 and 15%. So for a $3,000 bus, you're looking at a $300 tip for a driver. Typically that 10% is for like tour buses that have multiple stops along the way, and they're used the entire weekend. The truth is, for hackathon buses, it's strictly pickup drop-off. There's really nothing in between at all. So a couple $100s is usually pretty reasonable for a tip. Tolls, obviously, if the bus goes through a toll, it's not like a standard car toll where it'll cost you $2. They actually charge based on the number of wheels on a vehicle and the size. So tolls for buses can total up pretty quickly, so you want to know if those are included or not. Hotel, it's actually standard practice for a bus driver's hotel to be paid for by the group. In the most ideal situation, the bus company is actually the one taking care of the hotel. Your plate will have to reserve the hotel for the driver. It doesn't need to be the Ritz-Carlton by any stretch of imagination. I usually go on Hipmunk. I'll search a 50-mile radius around the venue. They have a check mark on Hipmunk that indicates if oversized transportation or oversized parking is available. So usually I'll call each of those hotels that I find that are reasonably priced. Typically those run anywhere from like $30 a night all the way up to like $120 a night for a hotel room. The key thing you want to make sure is that they don't charge for oversized parking. Usually I'll just call the hotel and I'll ask if it's okay to park a charter bus in the parking lot. You have to make it clear that there are no guests in the bus and it's just the driver in the bus. But it's pretty easy to find those. Fuel is another thing. Usually there's a fuel surcharge based on pricing. So if at the time you book the trip, the gas price is $5, and then for God knows what reason, when you actually get to the trip, gas doubles to $10, they'll charge you some kind of surcharge based on how much gas increased. So you should try that doesn't happen very often, but you should be aware of if it's included or not, and if the base fuel is included, which it should be. And the final one is tax. Bus companies love to do this. They don't include the tax in the quote to make it look cheaper. Definitely ask if tax is included. And again, at that little box at the bottom of the bus rates window, I always like you to ask for these things explicitly. I say, please indicate whether tip, tolls, hotel, fuel, and tax are included in this quote. The next thing you also want to ask for is proof of insurance and a US DOT number. These are two things that every bus company needs to have to operate in the United States. Insurance basically means that if something goes horribly wrong with the bus, like it gets into an accident, that the bus company has insurance to cover the damages. The amount of insurance that a bus has to have depends on the company and the state, but generally speaking, it's several $1 million in liability insurance, which is good for you guys. US DOT number, every charter bus or bookable vehicle like this needs to have a number with the Department of Transportation. Generally speaking, what you're supposed to do is collect everyone's DOT numbers, and then there's a function on the Department of Transportation's website where you can look up a company by DOT number. I've never actually done that. It's just a good practice to ask for it because it makes you sound more serious with the companies, and they don't try to rip you off as frequently. Although more and more people know to ask for the numbers, so it probably won't be effective in the long run. The next thing you want to do once you've started receiving emails with bus quotes on them is create a spreadsheet. Typically, I'll make a spreadsheet, and for each route, I'll indicate every company that I requested information from, and then I'll have a status column that says pending, and then as quotes come in, either they'll say we're sold out, a quote, they might need more information, but I'll fill out the columns as they come in. I typically highlight things in green if I'm going to book them. They're just pending quotes, and then if something is sold out, I highlight it in red so I know not to ignore it. Generally speaking, there are things I like to record are the company, the contact info, the bus price, the number of buses they have available in case you need multiple, the total cost for bus, and whether tip, hotel charge are included. So one thing to note, the next thing you want is negotiate on them. The tricky thing is you would imagine that national, like huge bus companies that have buses in multiple states are cheaper than local companies. The truth is the local companies are actually much cheaper. The reason the national companies are more expensive is because they don't actually usually own the buses. They sublease them from local companies on top of whatever the base price is for the local. So given that, when you go to a local company, you offered me $3,000 for this bus, but I have a quote from Greyhound for $2,800. Can you match that or beat it? They're going to tell you to go to hell because they don't care what these national vendors are doing because it's really just a markup on top of some local competitor. But if you come back and you say, hey, I have a quote for $2,800 from this other bus company down the road, they'll do anything in their power to beat their price because those are the people they're actually competing for business with. So when you're negotiating, definitely negotiate based on other local companies and use that to your advantage. So let's talk about some horror stories for buses. These are just things to watch out for. I'll tell some stories about things that happened with Major League Hacking when we were booking buses last semester. So the first one is this. So standard 56-passenger bus with an average price, your estimated cost per attendee is about $58. But the problem is if 56 people don't show up, the cost per attendee can quickly rise above that of what a travel reimbursement would have been. One of the worst problems that organizers tend to face is spending all the money chartering this bus, trying to get people to actually get on the bus and come to the hackathon, then the day of, nobody actually shows up. So how do you actually get people to show up and get on the bus? There's a couple of effective strategies for that. One of the most effective ones found is the calling or double opt-in method. So that's like a couple of days before the hackathon, you literally pick up the phone and you call every single person who has registered to get on the bus and confirm that they're going. Just that gentle reminder can be a good way to like ensure that people will show up the day of. You could also do first come, first served on a bus and oversell the bus, which is another effective strategy that we've seen. There's probably other ones out there. You could, take a deposit of $5 per person or something to that effect as well. Another thing to watch out for is the rating. So I mentioned before that you should only request quotes from companies that are 4 stars and above. So we had a bus this semester that was driving from Georgia Tech to the University of Maryland. There was only one bus company that had a bus available, and I'll talk about why that was in a second. So I opted for a company with the lower rating. It was a company that no one had ever but he happened to have a pretty good price. That it had been serviced recently and that it was in good condition and never have any problems. So the ride went off without a hitch for the first 5 hours, and then in the middle of nowhere, Virginia, the bus broke down. Just broken down. The engine was completely destroyed and was unrecoverable. So the was out of the road in the middle of nowhere, Virginia. It happened to be a month when there were no charter buses available in the area, and I spent a good 4 or 5 hours on the phone with the bus company owner and nearby bus companies trying to find. We couldn't find one, so we ended up renting enterprise rent-a-vans for everybody on the bus. And thank God there weren't a ton of people on there, because it easily cost us more than $4,000 to rent the actual vans to get people to the hackathon and then home. So you would imagine that if the bus only gets halfway and it doesn't actually make the return trip and I have to rent alternative transportation, that the bus company would refund my money. Instead, the bus company just decided to close its doors and keep all the money and call it a day. That's a common practice in the bus industry. If things go wrong, they'll just stop and start a new company and rebuy or rent the buses. So it's something you have to watch out for sure. So the reviews people leave are everything. You should definitely read them, and you should avoid renting companies that are cheaper just because of the cost. It's better to spend the extra couple $100 to get a good bus than try to skimp on every penny. The other thing to watch out for is the length of the drive. Earlier I said that the optimal length was within 6-hour driving distance. I'm pretty confident that this is the case. If you have a 9-hour bus ride and the bus breaks down 5 hours in, there's really not much you can do, because even if you send a bus from your venue to go pick up the people, it'll take them 10 hours to get to the hackathon. 10 hours into the event, they'll get back. If you have time to find a replacement bus, that's great, but they have probably spent a good 5 to 10 hours waiting on the side of the road at that point, and the event is almost probably over. Those people are not going to be very stoked to be there. If it's within a 6-hour driving distance, there's still a possibility that things can go wrong. But the truth is, the worst place the bus can break down is within 3 hours of the hackathon or 3 hours of home. Either way, it's not the end of the world, and finding a replacement bus within a 6-hour radius is usually not as much of a problem as within a 9-hour radius. The other thing to consider is that bus trips that are longer than 10 hours require at least 2 drivers mandatory. That's the law. And if a bus company thinks that it's even possible that the trip will go over 10 hours based on traffic, they will make you have 2 drivers, and it will cost twice as much, and you will have to pay for 2 hotel rooms. So having shorter trips is advantageous for everybody. So try to keep things to a driving distance of 6 hours. There are definitely schools within those areas that have students who are interested in attending hackathons. If you have trouble finding schools that are within a 6-hour radius, you should definitely reach out to us so we can help you find more schools and contacts at those schools. Another thing to watch out for is the month that you're renting the buses. So in January for Hack Tech, we rented 10 charter buses, I believe, coming from the Bay Area. And the buses were completely reasonably priced. They were, maybe $2,500 a piece coming from the Bay Area to LA, which was great. And that was in January, and we had no problems. When LA Hacks rolled around coming that same route from the same company, the price had nearly doubled. The trick was in April, tons of schools go on class trips, and they all charter buses to do it. The charter bus industry, like any industry, has months that are good and months that are bad. If you're chartering a bus in January when there's not as much bus traffic, the prices are going to be cheaper and there's going to be more buses available. If you wait until April to book your buses, if you didn't book them early, you might be in trouble. There are other months as well. Specifically, November tends to be problematic, and sometimes even October. So if you have a hackathon in any of those months, it's definitely advisable to reach out to bus companies before you get too close to the event. So the lesson there is watch out for school trips or other busy months. So the next thing we're gonna switch gears a little bit. In case you're not interested in charter buses, we're going to talk a little bit about travel reimbursements. We haven't done a ton of these, so these are just kind of some pro tips in my workflow. I certainly think that next semester we'll have some more to add to this, but this is just generally the process that we follow at Major League Hacking. So we typically use a combination of SendGrid, Wufoo, and Venmo. SendGrid, as an MLH event, you actually get free emails from SendGrid. If you haven't taken advantage of that, you can definitely shoot us an email at hi@mlh.io, and we'll get you hooked up. Basically, we'll create a newsletter and blast it out to everybody who's applicable or who's eligible for travel reimbursements with instructions on how to claim them. The key thing is just to outline the process very concretely. Who qualifies for travel reimbursement? How much is reimbursable? How to claim those reimbursements, and a timeline for getting reimbursed. One of the most common complaints we hear from hackers is that travel reimbursement takes months at a time. Obviously, as event organizers, we know that things come up and that sometimes getting travel reimbursements out is not the biggest priority. But if you keep hackers informed about when they can expect to be reimbursed, definitely keeps them at ease and will keep everybody happier. Within the SendGrid email is a link to the Wufoo form. You should definitely collect receipts and Venmo and contact info from every attendee that you're going to reimburse. You should make it clear that if they're uploading a receipt, that both the price and the date of purchase have to be clearly visible on the receipt. I did find a couple of receipts where people were submitting receipts from either different days or other flights trying to get them reimbursed. So it's actually something you kind of have to watch out for. That, or they might upload their thank you email that doesn't include the price or something along those lines. So you have to ask them for that. You should definitely keep receipts. We'll talk about that later. Venmo, we actually use Venmo to do the travel reimbursements for Major League Hacking. Venmo has a business account that makes it really easy, and there's actually an API that you can give an account and a balance and how much to pay. It's a 25-cent transaction fee per transaction with a business account, which is not bad. So one thing to watch out for is receipts. You should definitely keep receipts, especially if you're running some kind of LLC and you're not doing it through your school's club. If you ever do get audited, I promise you it will be a nightmare if you don't keep the receipts. It looks a lot like money laundering to somebody if you don't have them. So even if you just keep them in a Google Drive folder or Dropbox, you should absolutely keep them. And if somebody doesn't have a receipt, they should not be eligible for a travel reimbursement. One way around that, and this also applies to schools that may have stricter policies on what kind of payments you can make. One thing you can do is actually disguise reimbursements as prizes for people who traveled. So you could say, hey, anybody who traveled over 20 miles to get here, here is a traveling hacker prize, which is an Amazon gift card for up to $200 based on how far you traveled. Amazon gift cards are essentially cash based on all the things you can buy, and you can actually convert them to cash in a number of websites. So it's a pretty fair trade, and it's something you can write off as a prize and kind of slip in under the radar if necessary. Okay, so now we're going to switch to questions. Did we get any tweets or anything? Okay, well, I don't think we got any questions, but that's totally fine. Obviously, we had some technical difficulties up front. If you have questions, you can obviously always email them to us, hi@mlh.io. You can hit either John or I up on Twitter. You can tweet it at mlhacks. We're happy to answer them. And obviously, if you are new to Major League Hacking, or you're a student hackathon organizer, or you're somebody who's thinking about organizing a hackathon, definitely get in touch. We'd love to help. But I think that concludes our presentation. Hopefully, the next time we do this, we won't have as many technical difficulties. For anybody who actually did get to tune in, thanks for watching. That's it.